In the supermarket line, my son-in-law shouted at the cashier, "Don't talk to the old man, he's just the gardener." My daughter and grandson laughed, but what my son-in-law didn't know was that I was the one paying his salary. On Monday, I made sure to demote him to toilet unclogger. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I never thought a simple trip to the grocery store would become the moment everything changed. At 61, I'd grown accustomed to being invisible in my own family, but what happened that Saturday afternoon cut deeper than I ever imagined possible. The line at Henderson's Market was longer than usual. Weekend shoppers filled every aisle, and I found myself standing behind my daughter Meadow, her husband Stuart, and my 8-year-old grandson Tyler. They hadn't seen me yet. I'd been in the gardening section, picking up some fertilizer for the roses I'd been tending in what they called my little hobby garden, behind their house. "Next," called out Marcus, the young cashier I'd known since he was Tyler's age. His family had lived in our neighborhood for years, and I'd helped his mother with odd jobs when times were tough for them. Stuart stepped forward, chest puffed out in that way he had when he wanted to assert dominance. He was 34, worked in middle management at some company downtown, and never let anyone forget how important he thought he was. His cart was loaded with expensive cuts of meat, imported wine, and organic everything, all paid for with the money Meadow earned from her job at the bank, though Stuart liked to act like he was the provider. "Good afternoon, sir," Marcus said politely, beginning to scan the items. "How's your day going?" Stuart barely acknowledged him, scrolling through his phone while Meadow organized their reusable bags. Tyler was bouncing around full of energy when he spotted me. "Grandpa Noel!" he called out, his face lighting up with genuine joy. It was the purest thing I'd felt all week. That's when everything went wrong. Stuart's head snapped up, his face immediately hardening when he saw me standing there with my small basket of gardening supplies and the few groceries I could afford on my fixed income. His expression shifted to something I'd seen countless times before, embarrassment mixed with disdain. "Tyler, get back here," Stuart commanded, his voice sharp enough to make other shoppers glance our way. Marcus smiled at me. "Hey there, Mr. Noel. How's the garden coming along?" "My mom's still talking about those tomatoes you gave her last month." I felt my chest warm slightly. At least someone remembered I existed. "They're doing well, Marcus. Tell your mother I'll have more ready next week if she'd like some." "That would be great. She'd love that. You know, you've got the magic touch with plants. I wish I had half your skill." Stuart's jaw clenched visibly. I could see the wheels turning in his head, calculating how this interaction made him look. In his world, being friendly with the cashier, being known as someone who grew vegetables, being anything other than important and wealthy was beneath him. "Don't talk to the old man!" Stuart suddenly snapped at Marcus, his voice carrying across several checkout lanes. "He's just the gardener." The words hit me like a physical blow. Just the gardener. In front of a young man I'd known for years. In front of strangers doing their weekend shopping. In front of my own grandson. Meadow, my 40-year-old daughter, who I'd raised alone after her mother left when she was 12, didn't defend me. Instead, she let out a little laugh. Not cruel, but not kind either. The kind of laugh that said she agreed with her husband, that his assessment of me was accurate and amusing. Tyler, bless his heart, looked confused. "But Mom, Grandpa's not just the gardener. He's my grandpa." "Shh, Tyler," Meadow said, pulling him closer to her. "Don't argue with your father." Marcus looked between Stuart and me, clearly uncomfortable. He'd known me for years as Mr. Noel, the kind neighbor who helped out when needed, who grew the best vegetables in the neighborhood, who always had time to listen to his problems when he was a troubled teenager. Now he was being told I was just hired help. Marcus stammered, unsure how to respond. Stuart's voice got louder, more authoritative. I said, "Don't talk to him. He works for us. Just ring up our groceries." The humiliation burned through me like acid. Other customers were staring now, whispering among themselves. I saw Mrs. Patterson from down the street watching with wide eyes, probably already composing the story she'd tell at her bridge club. I felt my face flush with shame, my hands trembling slightly as I gripped the handle of my small basket. But it was Tyler's reaction that broke something inside me. My grandson, the light of my life, looked from his father to me and back again. I saw the moment when understanding dawned on his 8-year-old face. The moment when he realized that in his father's world, I wasn't his beloved grandfather. I was just the help. "Come on, Tyler," Stuart said, taking the boy's hand firmly. "Let's go. We don't want to be late for dinner at the country club." the country club, where I'd never been invited, despite the fact that I was the one who'd helped Meadow with the down payment on their house, where my grandson would learn to see people like me as invisible, as less than. As they walked away, I heard Tyler ask, "Dad, why can't Grandpa come to dinner with us?" Stuart's response carried back to where I stood frozen in line. "Because, grandson, some people are meant to serve, and others are meant to be served. Your grandfather serves us. That's his place." Meadow said nothing, not one word in my defense. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds, holding my small basket of humble groceries, feeling the weight of 61 years of life suddenly pressing down on me. Marcus finished with the next customer in awkward silence, and when my turn came, his eyes were full of sympathy I didn't want to see. "Mr. Noel, I'm sorry about that," he whispered as he scanned my items. "You know that's not how I see you, right?" I managed a weak smile. "Thank you, son. Don't worry about it." But I was worrying about it. I was drowning in it. The drive home was a blur of familiar streets that suddenly felt foreign. I pulled into the driveway of the small apartment I rented above the Martinez family's garage, climbed the narrow stairs to my tiny space, and sat heavily on my worn couch. That's when the tears came. Deep, silent sobs that shook my whole body, not just for what had happened today, but for all the years of being treated like I was nothing. All the family dinners where I sat at the kitchen table while they ate in the dining room. All the holidays where I was expected to help serve but not really participate. All the times Tyler had been told he couldn't spend too much time with Grandpa because I might fill his head with the wrong ideas about life. I'd told myself it was enough just to be near them, just to be part of Tyler's life in whatever small way they'd allow. I'd convinced myself that love meant accepting whatever scraps of affection they were willing to throw my way. But sitting there in my small apartment, my body still trembling from the humiliation, I realized something had broken inside me today. Something that couldn't be fixed with patience or understanding or hoping they'd eventually see my worth. For the first time in decades, I allowed myself to feel angry, really, truly angry. And that anger was about to change everything. That night, I couldn't sleep. The humiliation at the grocery store played over and over in my mind like a broken record. By 3 a.m, I found myself sitting at my small kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring at the stack of financial documents I kept in a locked drawer. Documents that would shock Stuart speechless if he knew they existed. My hands shook slightly as I opened the folder marked Hartwell Industries. Inside were stock certificates, board meeting minutes, and quarterly reports for a mid-sized logistics company that employed 237 people. A company that Stuart worked for as a regional supervisor, making $68,000 a year plus benefits. A company I owned. I'd founded Hartwell Industries 23 years ago, when Meadow was 17 and college was looming. Back then, I was working construction during the day and driving delivery trucks at night, desperate to save enough money to give my daughter opportunities I'd never had. My back was destroying itself. My hands were permanently stained with grease and concrete dust. But I was determined that Meadow would never struggle the way I had. The logistics business started small. I noticed how inefficient the supply chains were for the construction companies I worked with, how much money was being wasted on poor coordination and scheduling. With $5,000 I'd scraped together and a business plan I'd written at this same kitchen table, I started making calls. The first year nearly killed me. 18-hour days, living on peanut butter sandwiches and instant coffee, sleeping 4 hours a night when I was lucky. But slowly, steadily, it grew. Small construction companies started using my services, then larger ones. Within 5 years, I had a fleet of trucks and a warehouse. Within 10 years, I had contracts with 3 states' worth of businesses. I'd built it all in secret, using a business manager and maintaining the fiction that I was just Noel the handyman, Noel the gardener, Noel the guy who fixed things around the house. I told myself I was protecting Meadow from the pressures that came with money, from people who might want to use her for her father's wealth. The truth was more complicated than that. I was protecting myself from their judgment, from their potential greed, from the fear that they might only want me around for what I could provide financially rather than who I was as a person. How wrong I'd been about that last part. I flipped through the pages, remembering the day 3 years ago when Stuart had applied for a job at Hartwell Industries. He'd been unemployed for 6 months, his previous company having laid him off due to restructuring. Meadow had been stressed about money, worried about the mortgage, talking about having to ask me for help again. When I saw his application come across my business manager's desk, I'd felt a mix of emotions I still couldn't untangle. Pride that my company was successful enough to attract applicants. Nervousness about having my son-in-law work for me without knowing it. And something darker. Curiosity about what kind of employee Stuart would be when he thought no one important was watching. The performance reviews made for interesting reading now. Stuart was adequate at best. He showed up on time most days, did the bare minimum required, and spent a lot of energy trying to impress people he thought mattered while treating support staff poorly. His supervisor had noted multiple instances of Stuart being dismissive to warehouse workers, condescending to administrative assistants, and generally acting like he was too good for the job he was lucky to have, just like he acted with me. I remembered the day he got the promotion to regional supervisor. Meadow had been so proud, calling to tell me the good news. "Stuart's moving up in the world, Dad. This company really recognizes talent when they see it." I'd bitten my tongue, not mentioning that the promotion came with specific instructions from me to his supervisor to give Stuart just enough responsibility to keep him busy, but not enough to actually damage anything important. It was a glorified assistant position dressed up with a fancy title and a modest raise. Stuart had celebrated by taking Meadow and Tyler to an expensive restaurant and making sure to mention, loudly enough for other diners to hear, that he was now a regional supervisor for a major logistics company. He'd conveniently forgotten to mention that 6 months earlier he'd been unemployed and desperate. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who'd humiliated me in public, who'd called me just the gardener, who'd told his son that some people were meant to serve while others were meant to be served. That man's paycheck came from my company. His health insurance, his retirement contributions, his paid vacation days, all of it funded by the wealth I'd built while he saw me as nothing more than hired help. I pulled out another folder, this one containing property records. The house where Meadow, Stuart, and Tyler lived wasn't just helped along by my down payment contribution. I'd co-signed the mortgage when Stuart's credit wasn't good enough to qualify a loan. I was technically part owner of their home, though they'd conveniently forgotten that detail over the years. The gardening supplies they mocked me for buying. I maintained the landscaping that kept their property value high. The little hobby garden Stuart dismissed? It saved them hundreds of dollars a month in grocery bills, though they never acknowledged that either. For 23 years, I'd built wealth while living like I was poor. I'd created jobs, supported families, contributed to the economy, all while letting my own family believe I was a failure. I'd sacrificed recognition, respect, even basic dignity, telling myself it was worth it to keep the peace, to stay close to Tyler, to maintain whatever relationship I could with Meadow. But sitting there at 3:30 in the morning, my coffee long gone cold, I finally admitted the truth to myself. They didn't want a relationship with me. They wanted a servant who happened to share their DNA. The realization was like a physical weight lifting off my chest. For years, I'd been afraid of losing them. Now I understood that I'd never really had them to begin with. I thought about Tyler, my sweet grandson who was slowly learning to see his grandfather as less than human. About Meadow, who'd become someone I barely recognized. About Stuart, strutting around like a peacock, completely unaware that his entire lifestyle depended on the old gardener he'd humiliated in public. The anger that had started in the grocery store was growing into something else now, something colder, more focused. It wasn't rage anymore, it was clarity. I reached for my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for Janet Morrison, my business manager. Janet had been running the day-to-day operations of Hartwell Industries for the past 8 years, and she was one of the few people who knew the truth about my identity. She was also someone who worked weekends and wouldn't mind a late-night call about business matters. "Mr. Hartwell?" Janet's voice was alert despite the early hour. "Is everything all right?" "Janet, I need you to do something for me first thing Monday morning," I said, my voice steadier than it had been in hours. "I want Stuart Morrison's position restructured." There was a pause. Janet knew exactly who Stuart was, the son-in-law who worked for us without knowing his father-in-law owned the company. She'd seen his performance reviews, had heard about his attitude problems from multiple supervisors. "What kind of restructuring are we talking about, sir?" I stared at the financial documents spread across my table, at the evidence of everything I'd built while being treated like nothing. "I want him moved to facilities maintenance. Specifically, I want him cleaning restrooms and handling plumbing issues." Make it a lateral transfer, same pay, but make sure he understands his new responsibilities very clearly. Sir, that's quite a demotion in terms of prestige. Are you sure about this? I thought about Stuart's voice echoing through the grocery store. Don't talk to the old man, he's just the gardener. I thought about Tyler's confused face, about Meadows' dismissive laugh, about decades of being invisible in my own family. I'm absolutely sure. And Janet? Make sure his supervisor explains that this transfer came from the very top. I want Stuart to know that someone important made this decision about his career. Understood, sir. Anything else? I looked around my small apartment, at the simple life I'd maintained while building an empire in secret. Soon, very soon, that secret was going to matter more than Stuart could possibly imagine. That's all for now. Thank you, Janet. As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Control. For the first time since Meadow was a child, I wasn't just reacting to their treatment of me. I was taking action. Monday morning couldn't come fast enough. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood perfectly. I'd spent the weekend in a strange state of calm anticipation, like the quiet before a storm. For the first time in years, I wasn't dreading the week ahead. Instead, I was looking forward to it. I made my coffee, read the newspaper, and tended to my small herb garden on the fire escape outside my apartment window. The routine was the same, but everything felt different. I was different. At exactly 9 o'clock, I called Janet. "Good morning, Mr. Hartwell," she answered on the first ring. "I've been expecting your call." "Is it done?" "Stuart Morrison has been transferred to facilities maintenance as of this morning. His supervisor, Mike Rodriguez, is meeting with him at 9:30 to explain his new responsibilities." Mike was very thorough in making sure Stuart understands that this decision came directly from executive management. I felt a satisfaction I hadn't experienced in decades. How did Mike present it? Exactly as you requested. He told Stuart that the company was restructuring several positions and that executive leadership had specifically chosen him for this new role. Mike emphasized that Stuart should consider himself fortunate to be retained during these changes and that his performance in this position would be closely monitored by senior management. Perfect. And his new duties? Janet's voice carried just a hint of amusement. Cleaning and maintaining all restroom facilities across our 3 buildings, unclogging drains, handling minor plumbing repairs, and general janitorial support. Mike made it very clear that Stuart's attention to detail in these tasks would be personally reviewed and reported to the executive level. I imagined Stuart's face during that conversation. The man who'd called me just the gardener was now going to spend his days with his hands in toilets and drain pipes. The irony was almost too perfect. "Thank you, Janet. Keep me posted on how he handles the transition." "Will do, sir. One more thing." Mike mentioned that Stuart seemed quite shocked by the transfer. He kept asking if there had been some mistake, if someone had confused him with another employee. Mike assured him that the decision was very deliberate and came from people who had been watching his work very carefully. After hanging up, I sat back in my chair and allowed myself a small smile. Phase 1 was complete. Around 11 o'clock, my phone rang. It was Meadow, calling from her office at the bank. "Dad, you'll never believe what happened to Stuart today," she said, her voice strained with worry and confusion. I kept my tone neutral, concerned. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" "They moved him at work, just like that. No warning, no explanation that makes any sense. They're making him clean bathrooms, Dad. Bathrooms. He was a regional supervisor, and now they have him mopping floors and fixing toilets." "That does sound strange," I said carefully. "Did they give him any reason? Something about restructuring and new roles, but it doesn't make sense. Stuart's been a good employee. He's never had any problems at work. Why would they do this to him?" I thought about Stuart's performance reviews, about his condescending attitude towards support staff, about his habit of taking credit for other people's work while contributing as little as possible himself. But Meadow had never seen that side of him, or maybe she'd chosen not to see it. "Maybe it's temporary," I suggested. "Companies do strange things sometimes. Perhaps if he shows them he's willing to do whatever job they need, they'll move him back up." That's what I told him. But he's furious. He's talking about quitting, about finding another job. But Dad, we can't afford for him to be unemployed again. The mortgage, Tyler's school expenses, everything depends on that income. The mortgage I'd helped them get, the house I was co-signed on, the lifestyle they'd built while treating me like hired help. "I'm sure it will work out," I said. "Stuart's a smart man. He'll figure out how to handle this." What I didn't tell Meadow was that I was curious to see exactly how Stuart would handle it. Would he swallow his pride and do the work? Would he storm out in indignation? Would he finally understand what it felt like to be looked down upon, to have your worth measured by other people's narrow definitions of success? That afternoon, I decided to take a walk through the neighborhood. My route happened to take me past the Hartwell Industries main building, a modest but well-maintained office complex surrounded by warehouses and loading docks. I'd driven by countless times over the years, but I'd never stopped to really look at what I'd built. The parking lot was full of cars belonging to people who worked hard for honest wages. Inside those buildings, families were being supported, mortgages were being paid, children were getting their school supplies and doctor's visits and birthday presents. I'd created something real here, something that mattered to more than just my bottom line. As I stood there, I saw a familiar figure emerge from the main building. Stuart, wearing work clothes instead of his usual business casual attire, looking defeated and angry. His hands were dirty, his shirt had water stains, and his face was flushed with humiliation. He didn't see me standing across the street, just an old man out for a walk. I watched as he got into his car and sat there for several minutes, gripping the steering wheel like he was trying to squeeze the life out of it. Through his windshield, I could see him talking to himself, probably rehearsing the complaints he'd share with Meadow when he got home. Part of me felt a twinge of something that might have been sympathy, but then I remembered his voice in the grocery store. "Don't talk to the old man. He's just the gardener." I remembered Tyler's confused face, Meadow's dismissive laugh, the way other customers had stared at me like I was something shameful. That twinge of sympathy disappeared completely. That evening, I was watering my tomato plants when I heard raised voices coming from Meadow and Stuart's house next door. Their kitchen window was open, and sound carried easily across the small gap between our properties. "This is humiliating, Meadow." Stuart's voice was tight with anger. "Do you understand what they're making me do? I have a business degree. I was managing people, handling important accounts, and now I'm cleaning toilets like some. Like some what, Stuart?" Meadow's voice was sharp. "Like some person who works for a living? Like some person who does what needs to be done to support his family?" "That's not what I meant, and you know it. This is beneath me. Whoever made this decision obviously has it out for me. I should quit. I should walk out tomorrow and find something better." "With what job prospects? You were unemployed for 6 months before you got this position, remember? And now you want to throw it away because your ego is bruised?" I heard a chair scrape against the floor, footsteps pacing back and forth. "Maybe I should call your father," Stuart said, his voice taking on a wheedling tone that made my skin crawl. "Ask him to help us out while I look for something more appropriate. He's always offering to help, right? Maybe it's time to take him up on it." My hands tightened on the watering can. Here it was, the moment I'd been expecting. When things got difficult, when Stuart's pride was wounded, the first solution was to turn to the old gardener for financial support. "I'm not asking my father for money," Meadow said firmly. "Dad's done enough for us already. You need to figure this out yourself." I felt a flicker of something that might have been hope. Maybe Meadow still had some sense of boundaries, some respect for my dignity. "Besides," she continued, "it's not like Dad has that much to spare. He lives in that tiny apartment, drives that old truck, shops with coupons. He's probably barely getting by on his Social Security." The hope died instantly. Meadow wasn't protecting my dignity. She just assumed I was too poor to help them in any meaningful way. In her mind, I wasn't a potential source of financial support because I wasn't worth enough to matter. "You're right," Stuart said, his voice calming down. "I forgot for a minute that your father's just as broke as the rest of the working class. Well, I guess I'll have to tough it out at this job until something better comes along." Just as broke as the rest of the working class. The man whose paycheck came from my company, who lived in a house I'd helped finance, who fed his family vegetables from my garden, was dismissing me as irrelevant because he couldn't see past his own assumptions. I finished watering the plants and went inside, my mind already moving to the next phase of my plan. Stuart thought his current situation was humiliating. He thought cleaning toilets was beneath his dignity. He had no idea how much worse things could get. I opened my laptop and started typing an email to Janet. It was time to make some additional changes to Stuart's employment situation. After all, if he was going to learn what it really meant to be treated as just the help, He might as well get the full experience. The grocery store humiliation had been the spark. Tonight's conversation had been the fuel. Now the fire was really going to start burning. And Stuart Morrison was about to discover that some old gardeners had more power than he could ever imagine. The changes I'd implemented at Hartwell Industries were working exactly as intended. Over the next 2 weeks, Stuart's work situation went from bad to worse, and the effects were rippling through his home life like cracks, spreading through ice. Janet kept me updated with regular reports. Stuart's new supervisor, Mike Rodriguez, was following my instructions to the letter. Every task was scrutinized, every mistake documented, every moment of Stuart's entitled attitude captured in detailed performance reviews that would eventually make their way to the executive level. "He's struggling with the transition," Janet reported during one of our weekly calls. "Mike says Stuart keeps asking to speak with management about getting his old position back. He claims there's been some kind of misunderstanding. And how is Mike handling those requests?" "Exactly as you instructed. He tells Stuart that his employment status is being carefully monitored by senior leadership and that any changes to his current role would need to be approved at the highest levels of the company. He emphasizes that Stuart should focus on excelling in his current position if he wants to be considered for advancement." The beautiful irony wasn't lost on me. Stuart was essentially begging to speak with me, the owner of the company, the man he'd humiliated as just the gardener. He wanted the chance to plead his case to someone important, someone with real power, never knowing that person was watering tomatoes 20 feet from his bedroom window every evening. But it was what was happening at home that really revealed the true nature of my daughter's marriage. I started paying closer attention to the sounds coming from next door. The raised voices were becoming more frequent, the arguments more bitter. Stuart's frustration with his work situation was poisoning everything else in his life, and he was taking it out on the people closest to him. "I can't live like this, Meadow," I heard him say one evening as I was tending my small garden. "Do you understand what it's like to have people look at you like you're nothing? To have your coworkers smirk when they see you coming out of a bathroom with a mop and bucket?" The question hit me like a physical blow. Did I understand what it was like to be looked at like nothing? I'd been living that reality for years, courtesy of Stuart himself. "It's temporary," Meadow's voice carried through their open kitchen window. "You just need to show them you're willing to do whatever it takes." Easy for you to say. You're not the one crawling around fixing toilets while people half your age treat you like hired help. Hired help. The phrase he'd used to describe me to Tyler, to teach my grandson that some people existed to serve others. Now Stuart was discovering what that actually felt like, and he couldn't handle it. "Maybe this is a lesson," Meadow said, her voice carrying a sharp edge I'd rarely heard before. "Maybe you need to learn some humility." "Humility?" Stuart's voice rose dangerously. "Are you taking their side now? Are you saying I deserve this?" What followed was the sound of something slamming, a cabinet door maybe, or Stuart's fist against the wall. Then Tyler's small voice, scared and confused. "Daddy, why are you yelling?" "Go to your room, Tyler," Stuart snapped. "Adults are talking." I heard the boy's footsteps retreating and my heart ached for him. Tyler was learning new lessons now, watching his father's true character emerge under pressure. The man who'd seemed so confident and successful was revealing himself to be someone who couldn't handle adversity with grace. A few days later, the situation escalated. I was coming back from the grocery store when I saw Meadow's car in their driveway, home from work earlier than usual. Through their living room window, I could see her and Stuart in what looked like an intense conversation. As I climbed the stairs to my apartment, their voices became clearer. "The electric bill is past due, Stuart. Past due. How did you let it get this bad?" "I've had other things on my mind, okay? Like the fact that my career is being flushed down the toilet by people who don't appreciate my value." "Your value? What value? You're not bringing in any extra income. You're not looking for other jobs. You're just complaining and feeling sorry for yourself while the bills pile up. I'm doing the best I can in an impossible situation." "No, you're not. You're wallowing. And meanwhile, I'm working extra hours at the bank trying to cover the shortfall. And Tyler's asking why Daddy's always angry." There was a long pause, then Stuart's voice, colder than I'd ever heard it. "Maybe the problem isn't my job. Maybe the problem is that we're living beyond our means because your family couldn't be bothered to actually succeed at anything. If your father wasn't such a loser, maybe he could have left you something more than a pile of debt and a work ethic that doesn't pay the bills. My hands clenched around my grocery bags. There it was, the real Stuart, the one who came out when he felt cornered. When his own failures threatened his comfortable life, he turned his anger on the people who couldn't fight back. "Don't you dare blame my father for your problems," Meadow shot back. "Dad has always done whatever he could to help us. He's never asked for anything in return, and he certainly doesn't deserve to be talked about like that." I felt a moment of something that might have been pride. Maybe Meadow would finally stand up for me, finally see Stuart for what he really was. "Help us?" Stuart laughed bitterly. "What help? A few vegetables from his little garden? Babysitting when we're desperate? Your father is a sweet old man, Meadow, but let's not pretend he's capable of solving real problems. He can barely take care of himself. At least he doesn't throw tantrums when life gets difficult. At least he doesn't take his frustrations out on everyone around him. And at least I don't settle for scraping by like some kind of peasant. Your father has no ambition, no drive. He's content to live in that pathetic little apartment and tend his tomatoes while the world passes him by. Is that what you want for Tyler? To grow up thinking that mediocrity is acceptable?" I stood frozen on my stairs, listening to my son-in-law tear apart everything I was, while my daughter defended me with half-hearted protests. Stuart saw me as a failure, a burden, a cautionary tale of what happened when people didn't strive for more. If only he knew who was really responsible for his current situation. "Tyler loves his grandfather," Meadow said quietly, "and Dad has always been there for us when it mattered." "Has he? Really? Because I don't see him offering to help with our financial problems. I don't see him stepping up to make our lives easier." "All I see is an old man who expects us to be grateful for vegetables and free babysitting while we struggle to maintain a decent standard of living. What are you suggesting?" Stuart's voice took on a calculating tone that made my skin crawl. "I'm suggesting that maybe it's time for your father to contribute more meaningfully to this family. He's living in that apartment rent-free because the Martinez family feels sorry for him, right? Maybe he should be helping us with our mortgage instead of just existing as some kind of charity case. Rent-free." Stuart thought I was living in my apartment as some kind of charity arrangement. He had no idea that I owned the Martinez family's house, that they paid me rent every month, that their kindness in letting me stay above their garage was actually a business arrangement that benefited them far more than me. "I'm not asking my father for money," Meadow said firmly. "That's not fair to him." "Fair? What's fair about us struggling while he sits in his garden playing with dirt? What's fair about me having to clean toilets while he gets to live like a retiree with no responsibilities?" The conversation continued, but I'd heard enough. I quietly entered my apartment and sat down heavily on my couch, the grocery bags forgotten on the floor beside me. Stuart's true feelings about me were now completely clear. I wasn't just invisible to him, I was actively resented. In his mind, I was a burden who should be contributing more to their lifestyle, a failure who should be subsidizing their success. The man who made his living from my company, who lived in a house I'd helped finance, who fed his family from my garden, thought I owed him more. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Janet's number. It was time for phase 3 of Stuart's education. If he wanted to understand what it really meant to struggle, if he wanted to know what it felt like when life became genuinely difficult, I was more than happy to provide that lesson. But first, I needed to protect Tyler. Whatever was about to happen between Stuart and me, my grandson shouldn't have to witness his father's complete downfall. The boy deserved better than to watch his family implode because his father couldn't see past his own arrogance. As I dialed Janet's number, I could still hear Stuart's voice echoing in my head. "Your father is a sweet old man, but let's not pretend he's capable of solving real problems." Tomorrow, Stuart Morrison was going to discover just how capable this sweet old man really was, and this time there would be no going back. 3 weeks after Stuart's demotion to facilities maintenance, Janet called me with news that made my heart race with anticipation. "Mr. Hartwell, Stuart Morrison has requested a meeting with executive management. He's been asking Mike Rodriguez daily about speaking with someone in charge, and Mike finally told him that a meeting could be arranged with the company owner." I felt a smile spread across my face. Did Mike explain who he'd be meeting with? "Only that it would be with the person who makes all final decisions about personnel matters." Stuart seemed relieved, like he finally had a chance to plead his case to someone important. "Schedule it for tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Conference room B, and Janet, make sure Stuart understands that this meeting is his one opportunity to address his employment situation directly with senior leadership." "Understood, sir. Should I prepare any documentation?" "Just his complete employment file, performance reviews, supervisor reports, everything we have on record." After hanging up, I sat back in my chair and allowed myself to savor the moment. Tomorrow, Stuart Morrison would finally meet the owner of Hartwell Industries, the man whose judgment he respected, whose authority he acknowledged, whose power he desperately wanted to access. He just didn't know that man was the old gardener he'd humiliated in public. That evening, I could hear Stuart on the phone with someone, probably rehearsing his arguments for tomorrow's meeting. His voice carried through the thin walls between our properties, full of renewed confidence and self-importance. "Finally, I get to talk to someone who matters," he was saying. "Someone who can see past all this bureaucratic nonsense and recognize my real value to the company." I almost felt sorry for him, almost. The next day, I dressed carefully for work, not in my usual gardening clothes or the simple outfits Stuart was accustomed to seeing me wear, but in the navy blue suit I kept for important business meetings. I polished my shoes, adjusted my tie, and looked at myself in the mirror. The man staring back at me looked exactly like what I was, a successful business owner who'd built something substantial from nothing. I arrived at Hartwell Industries at 1:30, entering through the executive parking area that Stuart had never seen me use. Janet met me at the private elevator that led directly to the executive offices. "He's already here," she reported. "Arrived 20 minutes early. Mike Rodriguez brought him up and he's waiting in conference room B. He seems nervous but hopeful." "How does he look?" "Desperate," Janet said bluntly, like a man who knows this is his last chance. I nodded and made my way to the conference room. Through the glass wall, I could see Stuart sitting at the polished conference table, wearing his best suit and practicing what looked like a presentation. His hair was perfectly styled, his posture carefully controlled. He was putting on the performance of his life for someone he assumed would be impressed by his professionalism and business acumen. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and opened the door. Stuart looked up with a confident smile that died the instant he saw my face. For a moment, neither of us moved. He blinked rapidly as if trying to clear his vision, as if what he was seeing couldn't possibly be real. "Mr. What? I don't understand." His voice came out as barely a whisper. I closed the door behind me and walked to the head of the conference table where a nameplate read, "N. Hartwell, CEO." Stuart's eyes followed the movement, then fixed on the nameplate, then traveled back to my face. "Good afternoon, Stuart," I said calmly, taking my seat. "I understand you wanted to discuss your employment situation with someone in authority." Stuart's mouth opened and closed several times without producing any sound. His face cycled through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, dawning comprehension, and finally, pure terror. You're... He couldn't finish the sentence. "I'm Noel Hartwell, owner and CEO of Hartwell Industries, the company where you've worked for the past 3 years, the company where you were recently transferred to facilities maintenance." I opened the folder Janet had prepared and spread Stuart's employment records across the table. "These are your performance reviews. Would you like to discuss them?" Stuart's hands were shaking now. He gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. "This is impossible. You're Meadow's father. You live in that apartment. You garden. You can't be." "I can't be what, Stuart? Successful? Important? Someone whose opinion matters?" I leaned back in my chair, studying his face. "What exactly did you think I couldn't be?" The color drained from Stuart's face as the full implications hit him. Every condescending comment, every dismissive gesture, every moment he'd treated me like hired help, all of it had been directed at the man who controlled his livelihood. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I had no idea." "No, you didn't, because you never bothered to actually see me, did you? You saw what you expected to see, an old man who worked with his hands, who lived modestly, who didn't fit your definition of success. It never occurred to you that appearances might be deceiving." Stuart was breathing heavily now, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool temperature in the conference room. "Mr. Hartwell, sir, I can explain." "Explain what? Your performance at this company? Your attitude toward support staff? Your habit of taking credit for other people's work while contributing as little as possible yourself?" I tapped the performance reviews. "It's all documented here, Stuart. Every supervisor you've worked under has noted the same patterns." I've always tried to do my best. Have you?" Because according to these reports, you've consistently treated warehouse workers with contempt, dismissed administrative staff as beneath your notice, and generally acted like you were too good for any job that didn't feed your ego. I looked up from the papers. Does that sound familiar? Stuart's breathing was becoming erratic. He looked like a man who was drowning and couldn't find anything solid to grab onto. The grocery store, he said suddenly, his voice cracking. When I told the cashier not to talk to you. When you called me just the gardener in front of my grandson. When you laughed at the idea that I might deserve basic human respect. When you taught Tyler that some people exist to serve others. I set the papers down and fixed him with a steady stare. Yes, Stuart, I remember that conversation very clearly. Stuart buried his face in his hands. When he looked up again, his eyes were red-rimmed and desperate. Please, I'm sorry. I didn't understand. If I had known who you were. If you had known I was wealthy, you would have treated me differently. If you had known I had power, you would have shown me respect. But the man I actually am, the grandfather who loves Tyler, the father who helped you buy your house, the person who grows vegetables to feed your family, that man deserved nothing but contempt. That's not what I meant. Isn't it? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds exactly like what you meant. You respect power and money, Stuart. You don't respect people. Stuart slumped in his chair, the fight going out of him completely. What are you going to do? Are you going to fire me? I considered the question seriously. Firing him would be simple, clean, satisfying, but it would also be temporary. Stuart would find another job eventually, probably learn nothing from the experience and continue treating people the same way he always had. That depends entirely on you, I said finally. You have two choices. You can continue working in facilities maintenance, do the job to the best of your ability, and learn what it really means to work hard for honest wages. Or you can quit, find another position somewhere else, and continue living the same way you always have. You're giving me a choice? I'm giving you exactly what you've always had. The opportunity to prove what kind of man you really are when no one important is watching. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where Stuart's car sat next to those of warehouse workers and office clerks. The difference is that now you know someone important is always watching. Stuart was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was small and defeated. Why didn't you tell us? Why keep it secret? I turned back to face him. Because I wanted to know who you really were. I wanted to see how you'd treat people when you thought they couldn't help or hurt you. I wanted to know what kind of father figure you'd be for Tyler, what kind of husband you'd be for Meadow, what kind of man you'd be when you thought no one was keeping score. And now you know. Yes, now I know. I returned to my seat and gathered up the performance reviews. The question is, what are you going to do with that knowledge? Stuart looked lost, like a man whose entire worldview had just collapsed around him. Does Meadow know? About the company, about any of this? No. And whether she finds out depends entirely on how you handle yourself from this point forward. I could see the wheels turning in Stuart's head, calculating angles, looking for advantages. Even now, even in his moment of complete defeat, he was thinking about how to spin this situation to his benefit. If you're thinking about using this information to try to manipulate Meadow or Tyler, I should mention that there are other consequences I haven't implemented yet, I said quietly. This conversation is just the beginning, Stuart, not the end. The threat hung in the air between us, and Stuart's face went pale again. He was finally beginning to understand that his entire life, his job, his house, his comfortable lifestyle, all of it existed at my discretion. What do you want from me? He asked, his voice barely audible. I looked at this man who'd humiliated me in public, who'd taught my grandson to see me as less than human, who'd dismissed me as worthless while living off the wealth I'd created. What did I want from him? I want you to learn what you should have been taught a long time ago, I said. That every person deserves respect regardless of their job or their bank account or their social status. That character isn't measured by what you own, but by how you treat people who can't do anything for you. I stood up and walked toward the door. You start your regular shift tomorrow at 7 a.m. Mike Rodriguez will be watching your performance very carefully, and he'll be reporting directly to me. As I reached the door, Stuart called out one last desperate question. What happens to my family if I fail? I paused with my hand on the doorknob. That's the beauty of this situation, Stuart. For the first time in your life, The consequences of your choices are entirely up to you. I left him sitting alone in that conference room, staring at the nameplate that had just turned his world upside down. Tomorrow would be the real test, whether Stuart Morrison was capable of learning humility, or whether some people were simply too proud to change. Either way, the old gardener was finally in control. The months that followed my revelation to Stuart brought changes I never could have anticipated. Not just in his behavior, but in the entire dynamic of our family, and most importantly, in my own sense of self-worth. Stuart did not quit his job at Hartwell Industries. Instead, he threw himself into facilities maintenance with a dedication that surprised everyone, including me. Janet's reports painted a picture of a man genuinely trying to change, not because he was pretending for my benefit, but because he was finally learning lessons that should have been taught decades earlier. He's been early to work every day for 6 weeks, Janet told me during one of our regular check-ins. Mike Rodriguez says he's stopped complaining about the work and started asking how he can do it better. Yesterday, he spent his lunch break helping train a new employee, showing him the ropes without being asked. I found this hard to believe at first. Stuart had never shown kindness to people he considered beneath him, but Janet's reports were consistent, and more importantly, I was seeing changes at home that couldn't be faked. The angry outbursts had stopped. The constant complaints about his job had been replaced by a quieter, more thoughtful demeanor. Most significantly, Stuart had started treating me differently, not with the desperate respect of someone who knew I held power over him, but with genuine courtesy that seemed to come from a place of authentic remorse. It was Tyler who helped me understand what was really happening. "Grandpa Noel," he said one afternoon as we worked together in my garden, "Daddy's been different lately." "Different how, buddy?" I asked, showing him how to properly stake a tomato plant. "He doesn't yell as much, and yesterday, when we went to the store, he said thank you to the lady who bagged our groceries. He never used to do that." Out of the mouths of babes. Tyler had noticed something that took me weeks to fully comprehend. Stuart wasn't just changing his behavior around me. He was changing his behavior around everyone. The real transformation became apparent about 3 months after our conference room confrontation. I was coming home from my weekly grocery shopping when I saw Stuart in the front yard with Tyler, teaching him how to use basic tools to fix a loose board on their fence. "The important thing," I heard Stuart saying as I climbed my stairs, "is to be respectful to people who work with their hands. People who fix things, who build things, who grow things. They're doing important work that makes everyone else's life better." I stopped dead in my tracks. Stuart was teaching Tyler the exact opposite of what he'd taught him in the grocery store that day. Instead of "some people are meant to serve while others are meant to be served," he was explaining that manual labor had dignity and value. That evening, Meadow knocked on my door. She looked tired but peaceful in a way I hadn't seen in years. "Dad, can we talk?" she asked, settling into my small kitchen table. "About Stuart, about what's been happening." My heart raced. Had Stuart told her about my company, about our confrontation, about the real reason behind his job changes? "What about Stuart?" I asked carefully. "He's been different, better, more like the man I married, actually, before success went to his head." She paused, studying my face. "I think he's finally growing up, learning to appreciate what he has instead of always wanting more." I nodded, not trusting myself to say much. "I also think," Meadow continued, "that I owe you an apology. I've let Stuart's attitude toward you influence how I treated you, and that wasn't fair. You've always been there for us, Dad. Always. And I haven't been grateful enough." The words hit me harder than I expected. This wasn't the result of Meadow learning about my wealth or my power. This was just her seeing me clearly for the first time in years. "You don't need to apologize, sweetheart," I said, my voice rougher than intended. "Families go through difficult periods. No, I do need to say this. Stuart told me something a few weeks ago that made me think. He said he realized he'd been measuring people by the wrong standards, that he'd been looking at job titles and bank accounts instead of character. He said you were the kind of man he wanted Tyler to become, hardworking, humble, generous. I had to look away to hide the tears that were threatening to spill over. Stuart had said that about me? The man who'd called me just the gardener now wanted his son to be like me? "There's something else," Meadow said. "Stuart wants to invite you to Tyler's birthday party next month. Not to help serve or clean up, as an honored guest. He wants to introduce you to his work friends as Tyler's grandfather, not as anything other than family." The irony was almost overwhelming. Stuart wanted to introduce me to his work friends, the same colleagues who knew me as the owner of their company, though Stuart still didn't realize that. "I'd love to come to Tyler's party," I said simply. Over the following weeks, I watched Stuart continue to evolve in ways that seemed genuine rather than performative. He started volunteering at Tyler's school, helping with maintenance projects. He began treating service workers with obvious respect and consideration. Most importantly, he started spending real time with Tyler. Not just playing with him, but talking to him about values, about treating people well, about finding meaning in honest work. The birthday party was a revelation. Stuart introduced me to his colleagues from Hartwell Industries with obvious pride. "This is Tyler's grandfather, Noel. He's taught our family more about character than anyone I've ever known." I shook hands with Mike Rodriguez, Stuart's supervisor, who gave me a knowing look, but said nothing about my true identity. I met warehouse workers who knew me as Mr. Hartwell but played along with the fiction that I was just Tyler's grandfather. The cognitive dissonance was surreal, but watching Stuart navigate these relationships with genuine warmth and respect made it worthwhile. Tyler's joy at having his whole family together, at seeing his father and grandfather getting along, was worth every moment of discomfort. But the real moment of truth came 6 months later, when Stuart made a decision that proved his transformation was complete. I was in my garden when I heard him talking to someone on the phone in his backyard. His voice carried clearly across the space between our properties. "No, I'm not interested in the promotion," he was saying. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm happy where I am." Curious despite myself, I moved closer to the fence line where I could hear more clearly. "I understand it's more money and prestige, but those things aren't as important to me as they used to be. I've learned a lot in my current position, and I feel like I'm finally doing work that matters." After he hung up, I couldn't help myself. "Stuart," I called over the fence. "Everything all right?" He appeared at the fence line, smiling in a way that seemed completely natural. "My old supervisor from the regional office called. They want me to come back, take a management position with another company. Better pay, corner office, the whole 9 yards. And you said no?" Stuart nodded. "Noel, I've learned something important over these past few months. Job titles don't make you a good man. Treating people well does. I'd rather clean toilets and go home knowing I've been kind to everyone I've met than manage people and turn into the kind of person I used to be." The transformation was so complete, so genuine, that I found myself making a decision I never thought I'd make. "Stuart," I said, "there's something I need to tell you." But before I could continue, Tyler came running out of the house, full of excitement about something he'd learned at school. Stuart immediately shifted his attention to his son, and the moment passed. Later that evening, as I sat on my small porch watching the sunset, I realized that some secrets were meant to be kept. Stuart had become the man I'd always hoped he could be, not because he knew about my power or my wealth, but because he'd learned to see the value in simple decency. Telling him the truth now would only complicate the genuine growth he'd achieved. It would make him question whether his transformation was real or just a response to knowing I held power over him. Instead, I made a different choice. I called Janet and arranged for Stuart to be promoted back to regional supervisor, not as a gift, but because his performance in facilities maintenance had genuinely impressed his supervisors. His kindness to coworkers, his work ethic, and his changed attitude had been noted by everyone who worked with him. When Stuart got the news about his promotion, he came to talk to me before celebrating with Meadow. "Noel, I wanted to thank you," he said, standing at my kitchen door with tears in his eyes. "This past year, watching how you've lived your life, seeing how you treat people with respect regardless of their circumstances, it's taught me what being a man really means." "You did the work yourself, Stuart," I replied honestly. "I just provided an example. I know I can never fully make up for how I treated you before, especially that day at the grocery store, but I want you to know that Tyler will never hear me speak disrespectfully about anyone again. He's going to grow up knowing that every person has value." As Stuart walked back to his house to share the good news with his family, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in decades. The humiliation at the grocery store had been the catalyst for everything that followed, but what emerged from that pain was something I never could have orchestrated deliberately. My family was whole again, not because I'd used power to force respect, but because I'd given Stuart the space to discover his own capacity for growth. Tyler would grow up with a father who understood the value of treating people well. Meadow had a husband who'd learned to appreciate what he had rather than always wanting more. And me? I was no longer invisible, no longer just the gardener. I was exactly what I'd always been, a man who'd built something meaningful with his life, who'd raised a daughter with love and sacrifice, who'd been there for his family when they needed him most. The secret of Hartwell Industries remained safe, locked away with Janet and the handful of people who needed to know. But the secret that mattered more, the secret of my worth as a human being, was finally visible to the people I loved most. That night I stood in my small garden, surrounded by the tomatoes and herbs that had sustained my family through lean times, and felt genuinely wealthy for the first time in my life. Not because of the money I'd accumulated or the business I'd built, but because I'd finally learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the greatest power isn't in revealing what you can do to people. Sometimes it's in giving them the chance to discover what they can become. And sometimes the quiet dignity of an old gardener is worth more than all the corner offices and executive titles in the world. Now I'm curious about you who listen to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.